Hi, Peter. We're back for another episode of Small Business by the Numbers. It is February, but we're going to talk about the first data collection of the year, our January data. And it was another quiet day in the neighborhood for small business optimism, or seemingly quiet day in the neighborhood. There's a bit of noise underneath the hood here, but our optimism index moved just ever so slightly, 0.2 of a point, remaining above the 52-year average, which was great. Not much movement within the components. And the index is now at 99.3. So that's good news. And the movement that we saw, the biggest contributor to that very small shift was expectations on sales going forward. So more small business owners are expecting higher sales in the next quarter. And so they're pretty optimistic moving into 2026. But the big news, which we featured a few days ago, is our new small business employment index. Just with that headline about the optimism index, which has been our headline measure of the small business economy, I wanted to send it over to you to talk about our new employment index and what that's showing us as far as the labor market and the small business sector.
Yes, super exciting to have this new index. The Optimism Index has always been a super useful tool for both us inside of NFIB, small business owners in general, people, policy, academia, because it takes this big resource of data that we have on all different types of small business sentiment, and then kind of condenses it into one number that you can use to get an overall pulse on small businesses. And now we have a unified number for the small business labor market. Tell us how tight or how slack that is. And this is super useful because you've heard us talk about the labor market in our first few episodes. And, we're kind of doing the Janet Yellen labor dashboard approach. We're like, oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. This is up, that's down. And we're doing our best as analysts to kind of give you one picture. And what's super helpful to people like us, people like you listeners, is when you have a rigorous process to put a bunch of these questions into one number. No number can tell you the whole story, but this new employment index is taking compensation and kind of hiring employee count questions, both actuals looking back at the prior 3 months and plans, i.e. looking forward to the next 3 months. 6 different components, combining these into one single number to give an overall pulse. And that pulse is really helpful because we were talking last month about the plane lowering and leveling off and how that was going. And this new index really tells a story about that. So totally confirms what we've been talking about in terms of a long descent from the peak in 2022 when the labor market was way too tight. It was overheated and we really needed things to calm down. We saw that calming. And it kind of continued through 2025, where that's where we started to be maybe a little bit nervous, like, ooh, this labor market's getting, how we almost started to pass balance and go to sort of like too weak of a labor market. And well, this new metric is suggesting, let's say, not saying as a fact, so because we need more data to be sure, more months coming in, but that the very end, the last couple months, like maybe that plane really has leveled out and started to almost maybe even see a little bit of strengthening. More data needed, but it's super great to have this index to give another really valuable data point to understand what's going on with small businesses as they pertain to jobs specifically.
And moving through this, looking at the employment part of our survey, outside of the employment index itself, we did see a bit of movement with the single most important problem. So what's their biggest challenge in operating the business right now? And we have talked about labor quality for months and months and months now, but it fell another 3 points to 16%. So now 16% of small business owners are saying that it's their biggest challenge. Taxes has moved up. 18% of our members are saying taxes are their biggest challenge. That is always a challenge. I mean, every 4 years, it's up there on the top of the leaderboard as far as our problems and priorities survey our other publication that has been around for decades now, where they evaluate 75 potential issues in operating their business. And taxes, many iterations of taxes are always at the top, kind of top 10 issues. But labor quality now has eased up a bit. And so it's certainly not rattling our perception of the small business labor market. It seems fairly healthy. Small business owners are still looking to fill those open positions, but it's not quite the challenge that it once was. So nice to have an overall view of the labor market through this new employment index, and excited to follow that in the next number of months to see if we see any movement there. Also wanted to point out a few other areas of interest within the results of our January data, one of which is the self-evaluation of the health of their small business. And so we saw a shift in this last report that more small business owners, there was a shift of those saying that they're self-evaluating their business as doing fair. So the categories are excellent, good, fair, poor. And we saw a shift from fair to excellent. This is a good sign. The economy is moving forward and is supporting the small business sector. And our members are telling us that the health of their business, they're self-evaluating it as doing pretty well. And so this shift, I thought, was a meaningful development in this last report. And then also one other area that I thought was interesting is when we look at capital spending, we saw an increase of small business owners reporting that they made a capital expenditure over the last 6 months. So up 4 points from December. 60% of small businesses said that they invested in their business. And so that I thought was something to pay attention to moving forward. With that, of those saying that they made a capital expenditure, more were saying that they were spending it on new equipment. So, whether that is because of the tax savings or that the business expensing deduction that was made permanent, all of these changes in the tax code that made it more friendly for small business owners to operate their business when thinking about tax considerations. This certainly could have been a motivating factor moving the needle as far as small business owners feeling more comfortable, feeling more confident in making those decisions to invest in their business, purchase new equipment, make their business more efficient. And so that development, we'll see how that moves forward. If it starts to incrementally increase, if this is just a 1 month anomaly, or, how it plays out. But certainly worth noting, I thought, in the January data that we just received.
Yeah, I mean, taxes matter, right? Our data is super clear on that. I think everyone who's gearing up for tax season is aware. And the new tax bill dramatically raises the level of equipment expenditures you can deduct, and it allows for immediate deduction of that. So that's an important change, and it's not surprising to see the data suggest that the small business owners are responding to that. I think one area that's maybe a little less positive, possibly also related to the tax bill, is insurance. So we saw in our data, the insurance category of single most important problem rise up to 13%. So it's not the highest problem, but that level actually makes it the highest in about 7 years.
I forgot about that one. I'm glad that you brought it up. That was definitely a meaningful development that we saw too.
Yeah, it's insurance overall. It's not health insurance specifically, but it's not crazy to think that that's related to health insurance, especially with what we've been reading about premiums and knowing that, of course, January is kind of that cliff when all of a sudden start paying your new rates. So it's a thorn in the side of small businesses right now.
It is. And as you said, we've heard about health insurance premiums this year being particularly difficult for small business owners. More seem to be experiencing higher premium increases from 2025. So whether it's for their employees themselves, business insurance, auto insurance, forgot about the auto insurance. That's been a problem that many small business owners have faced over the last number of years with escalating costs on that end too. So we'll be paying attention to where that goes going forward. Anything else that was interesting to you about this report, Peter, before we sign off?
Yeah, one last thing. when we talked about the December report, kind of talked about a Goldilocks report of optimism index increasing and uncertainty going down substantially. This report isn't the reverse of that because optimism index is essentially flat, which is good, especially since we're above the historical average. But uncertainty increased 7 points back to where we started. So a disappointing increase in uncertainty. 2025 was the highest year ever. It felt great to see the lowest point in December. Now we're starting off January 2026 on certainly not as bad a note as we were at for a lot of 2025, but it is a reacceleration from December. So that's a disappointment, something we'll certainly be monitoring going forward, but also keeping in mind with flat optimism index, increasing uncertainty is not the worst thing, but it is a little disappointing.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how that transitions with that increase or improved sales expectations. So if that pans out, if those expectations are realized in the next quarter, hopefully some of that uncertainty related to economic conditions will resolve itself and they'll feel more confident in operating their business. But very good point. So I think that wraps up January's data from the Small Business Economic Trends Report. And thank you everybody for joining us for another edition of Small Business by the Numbers.